Thank you for inviting me to speak at the World Forum on Democracy and Peace. It is an honor for me to be here amongst leading politicians, diplomats, governmental officials, journalists, and eager to learn young people. When I received Dr. Dunfried's invite, I was particularly interested in exploring the power of film and arts to build peace and promote democracy and human rights. Therefore, today I decided to talk about an Oscar-nominated movie called Navalny. The documentary is directed by Daniel Rohr, who was basically achieved the nomination last month. The plot covers the story of Navalny, who survived an assassination attempt by poisoning with a lethal nerve agent in August 2020. During his month-long recovery, he makes shocking discoveries about the attempt on his life and decides to return home. Although the movie focuses on and tells the story of Navalny himself, there is another story that I would like to bring your attention to. There is one man who contributes to the investigation that Navalny and his team are doing, and this is the Bulgarian investigative journalist, Hristo Grozev. Mr. Hristo Grozev is the lead Russian investigator with Bellingcat, focusing on security threats and the weaponization of information. His investigations into the identity of the suspects involved in the 2018 poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal earned him and his team the European Press Prize for Investigative Journalism. Mr. Grozev has also conducted several investigations regarding the KGB connection to several cases of explosions in ammunition warehouses in Bulgaria and cases of poisoning Bulgarian citizens. Bellingcat is an independent international collective of researchers, investigators, and citizen journalists using open source and social media investigation to probe a variety of subjects. Bellingcat's innovative approaches to using publicly available data and citizen journalist analysis have been particularly significant for advancing narratives of conflict, crime, and human rights abuses. On 26th of December 2022, right in the middle of the Christmas holidays, the Interior Ministry of Russia announced that Grozev was on its wanted list, without disclosing the reason. Up to this moment, neither the Bulgarian government nor Mr. Grozev himself have received any specific information on what could be the reason for his placement on Kremlin's wanted list. The reply from Russia's investigative committee to Grozev's lawyers was that there is no investigation against him, yet he is on the list. But why is this case so important? Because it undermines the principles of democracy, media freedom, and human rights. Authoritarian regimes and non-democratic governments are using such slap cases to threaten journalists, activists, and citizens who disclose information that is of special concern to the public, but the authorities might not love that. Free and independent media are as necessary to democracy as elections, parliaments, and independent judges. But those who deliver the facts to inform citizens are increasingly coming under attack, and not only in war zones. For their work, journalists and media workers often pay a heavy price. Journalism is not safe even in peaceful settings. Many journalists conduct their work in constant fear of threats and attacks. And make no mistake, the acute threat to media workers is not some faraway problem. Globally, including in the region of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the safety of media workers is under constant and growing pressure. Journalists face online and offline threats, surveillance, intimidation, physical attacks, and imprisonment. Worryingly, female journalists are increasingly being targeted. Furthermore, The role of independent data-based journalism is especially important in the current news environment. The whole Eastern European region is especially vulnerable and suffers intense hybrid attacks since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. In 2022, there were over 6,000 articles on the most visited news websites in Bulgaria, referencing Sputnik, Russia Today, TASS, RIA Novosti. But I must say that no country in Europe is immune to Russia's malign activities and Kremlin's attempts to influence opinions through disinformation. Russia is using information manipulation and interference as a crucial instrument of its war. As the Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Borrell, has said recently, this war is not only about bombs, bullets, and killing people. It is about the minds of the people. It is about how to conquer the spirit, intelligence, and understanding of people. And today, that is clear. This war is not only conducted on the battlefield by the soldiers, it is also waged in the information space, trying to win the hearts and minds of people. Almost a year after the start of Russia's brutal war against Ukraine, we all need to reflect on how it has impacted all of us and our freedom of speech. This war fundamentally changed security in Europe. Before I conclude, I would like to bring to your attention to one specific problem that Hristo Grozev's case shows us. Protecting those who are at the front line of defending democracies, journalists, media workers, activists, and civil society representatives. I call them defenders of democracy, as it is the title of my speech today. Over 2,000 journalists were detained while reporting on anti-mobilization protests in the Russian Federation. We, as the European member states, must do something to safeguard those journalists who are investigating authoritative regimes and are currently residing on EU territory. We also need to look into protecting our democracy and stand by the values our union is built upon. The monitoring report from the European Centre for Press and Media Freedom reveals more than 300 violations of media freedom only for the first half of 2022. Verbal attacks, including harassment and threats, were the most common types of violations, making up almost 40% of the total number of attacks. This was followed by legal incidents and physical attacks. Attacks to property made up 14% of alerts, and 13% of the alerts were linked to censorship, such as blocked access to information. Slap court cases are used to threaten and put pressure on civil society members and journalists whose activities are not in favor of governmental policies. Thus, we must prioritize anti-SLAPP legislation, as well as the Media Freedom Act and the implementation of the Democracy Action Plan. And more than that, we as members of civil society, politicians, or public opinion leaders must not be quiet when we see a danger to the freedom of speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madame Simeonova, for that passionate plea for the freedom of the media and for having emphasized how important it is, especially in such a situation of conflict, that the voices of that are independent of the government have also a chance to be heard. Because what often is the problem in situations of war is that each of the warring parties, of course, will try to streamline information in support of its own effort. And that is the situation you described to us in detail now concerning Russia. And the big question is a body such as the United Nations Human Rights Council able to do anything meaningful? Will it have an impact? Apart, of course, from mobilization of worldwide public opinion, which you mentioned. Please, we have now got some more time for questions and answers. If there is anyone from the audience who would. Otherwise, I would just ask one question concerning the media. You rightly defended the rights of the people in Russia, of journalists in Russia, to express their views, to provide the information without interference from the government. Are we, as far as Europe is concerned, and the wider European community, concerning this particular terrible conflict now, are we credible if we do not also strictly apply the principle of the freedom of information on our side? I mean, I have been to both sides. I have been to Russia. One must inquire about the situation, otherwise I cannot have an informed opinion if I only depend on what our mainstream media tell me. I have to go there and to see, if possible. Anyhow, of course there, I do not have access, if I'm in Moscow or St. Petersburg, I will not have access to certain Western TV stations or websites. That is certainly censorship. I cannot watch the BBC, for instance, and many other. But I live here in Austria, and also here I cannot access, because the government blocks channels from the other side, from the Russian side. But vis-à-vis citizens above the age, let's say, of maturity, 18, is that the proper approach? I think it is not. And one should have that much confidence in democracy, also on our side, that one does not prevent the people here from just checking information on the other side. If I know that this is, if I know the circumstances of the conflict, I can put this for myself in context. And I will not automatically believe everything what is coming from the other side. We had the situation during the Second World War in Germany and Austria. The term was Feind radio, enemy radio, and it was illegal to listen to enemy radio, and people were severely punished. Everybody would say that is totally unacceptable. But now, in the year 2023, should we not also, I mean, all what you said is totally right, and I subscribe to that. But should we not only also say this should be applied sine ira et studio, so to speak, on both sides? And in my view, the critique of what you described would be much more credible if on the Western side there would be no interference or no blocking of satellite frequencies or no blocking of websites, as far as those are just the TV programs and so on. And anyhow, one has to be honest in one sense. When there is a situation of war, there is a tendency towards streamlining information on all sides. But of course, the tendency is always to say our side is, so to speak, is on the morally or has the morally right position. The other side doesn't have, and for that reason we must suppress it. But in an open society, and that's, by the way, more also the approach in the United States. There's a big difference between the United States and Europe. In the United States, this idea of censorship or of blocking TV stations from Russia or China or Iran is not coming up, because it's against their understanding of the freedom of opinion as a constitutional right or constitutional principle. So that is my question, how you would see it as a fellow European citizen.
Thank you, sir. I would firstly like to start with underlining that Hristo Grozev, the person who I'm referring to, the journalist who is being put under Kremlin's wanted list, is a Bulgarian citizen, so European citizen, actually, who has lived in Austria at that time. So our call is for, firstly, to safeguard those journalists who are investigating authoritarian regimes residing on European territory, because they come here, some of them also from other countries, but here we speak about a free European journalist who was attacked in such a way. Furthermore, I think the European Commission, but also the European Parliament, are working very intensely these days, also in terms of the upcoming European elections, as you know, in 2024, to create mechanisms for protecting our democracy from interference in our democratic processes. And for example, in the beginning of December, I, as a Bulgarian member of parliament, have visited the European Parliament and discussed with other colleagues on exactly disinformation and all these type of problems that we all know are happening not only in Europe, but actually around the world. And as you might have heard, I outlined a couple of initiatives that the European Commission and European Parliament have started, and these are mainly the Media Freedom Act and the Democracy Action Plan. And I think we should have not only the means and the instruments, but also fair mechanisms to be able to provide our citizens with accurate and transparent information, but we also need to be very mindful about the opportunity of foreign interference in our democratic processes. And of course, there is a thin balance there, but I believe that the European Union is going right when thinking of some common means and common goals in order to fight these problems around here in Europe, and of course especially in such turbulent times which we have to go through.
And one follow-up question. As we are here in Europe, there is the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, of which not only all of the countries here are members, including Ukraine, but also Russia. So would meetings of this conference, of this organization, which is headquartered in Vienna, would meetings of this organization not create an opportunity to challenge, in this case, Russia, concerning this situation, and to make it a public issue in the forum of such a meeting? In my understanding, according to the charter of the OSCE, this would be totally appropriate. So my question to you is, as you defend a fellow Bulgarian citizen also, is it really wise to try to exclude Russia from those meetings where they take place? This happened in Poland recently, and now I haven't followed up in the last few days. There is another meeting going to be at the headquarters in Vienna, and there was a lot of pressure that Austria should refuse to give visa to the Russian delegation, which would even more extreme than what the United States ever did. The United States has the headquarters of the United Nations in New York. But the United Nations can only operate properly if the United States acts according to the headquarters agreement. So the United States will have to issue, and does in most cases issue, visa for Russian delegates, for delegates from Iran, and so on. also for delegates from countries it is with which it has tensions. So in this particular case, in my view, the question is this pressure now also on Austria to make a comprehensive meeting, a legal meeting, impossible by denying visa to Russian diplomats? Is that not counterproductive? Why do we not, if we exclude the other side, we cannot raise the issue properly, and there is no chance that the other side will take any meaningful step, for instance, concerning the rights of the journalists you mentioned. One should try to be so to speak, to act rationally according to diplomatic protocol and in conformity with the law in order to be able to argue vis-à-vis Russia in this case, also on the basis of the law, on the basis of the legal obligations of Russia as also a member, for instance, of the OSCE. So that is my question, how you would see it from Bulgaria.
I already mentioned in my speech that actually the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe has judged about the safety of media workers worldwide, and they say that they're under constant and growing pressure. I believe the European Union and such organizations are therefore organizations which need to make agreements about their joint counteractions towards different situations around the world. And as the previous speaker has said, I believe we all agree here who is the aggressor and what has happened in terms of the events that we've noticed in the past year. And such organizations have the strong power to have different voices there be heard, different countries being represented, and therefore they take their own common decisions and stands. And when it comes to the European Union and Bulgaria as a European Union country, we stand with Ukraine, and we hope that we will not see such conflicts in the future, and we will see this country be in their own territory and be free, as our European Union also believes in unity and in freedom and in the opportunity of all of us to live on our territories. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Simeonova.